Welcome again to the Push-Pull Podcast. My name is Varun Rajan, and I interview professionals about their careers and specifically about the push and pull factors behind the transitions when they went from one part of their career to the next. Today, I interview Rajan Trivedi. He is a product leader that has worked across a number of different marketplaces. He and I met when we were at Chegg together, and we had an incredible conversation. Rajan thinks about career transitions in a framework of two dimensions, industry or function, role type. It is easier to make a transition from one of those dimensions to another while still staying in the other dimension. So, for example, early in his career, he started in consulting and moved to the public sector and then to a startup before going back to grad school with an eye towards becoming a product manager. But once he was a product manager, he moved from finance to prop tech to ed tech, but he stayed a product manager the entire time. The thesis really being that making that transition from one industry to another or staying within an industry and going from one job function to another is a much easier way to redound to your career benefit without really backtracking. The other thing that's really interesting about his career in general is the way that he's thought about risk and adventure over the course of his career. He had a high appetite for risk early on in his career. As he got more and more deeply into product management, he found that the risk appetite changed and adjusted to fit the role that he was in. He found a lot more complexity in the product management role and risk factors within the different companies and industries that he could be in. So that's really interesting to listen to over time. Another thing that stood out to me was his love for discovering product management and data in particular, and how that really drove him to understand that he could be driving outcomes on a scale that he could actually see the results of the work that he was doing. That was something that really motivated him. So hope you enjoy the conversation. We're here with Rajan Trivedi, a product leader who has worked across a number of different marketplaces. Thanks for being with us, Rajan.
Yeah, thanks for having me and super excited for the conversation, Varun.
Awesome. Give us a 30 to 60 second overview of who you are and what you care about today.
Yeah, totally. I'm a FinTech geek and I come from three generations of bankers. My mom worked at SunTrust Bank. My grandfather worked at the State Bank of India. No surprise I got interested in financial services. I'm a product leader. I've worked across highly regulated industries and many different marketplaces. In my career, I've done 3 different career switches. And of the 7 jobs I had since undergrad graduation, 6 of them came in from networking. And so happy to have the conversation, excited to talk about career transitions and my product management journey.
Awesome. Let's start with, if I were to ask you about the beginning of your career, where would you start us off? And what did you study in undergrad?
I studied economics in undergrad, thinking that I was going to do a 30-year career in the public sector. I had a lot of excitement and passion around international development, and I had done research in the international development and geospatial lab. I was definitely the Model UN dork and nerd in college, and really saw and thought that a career in diplomacy and development was my passion. And I did what most folks undergrad do, which is I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I went into consulting. That was where some of the gravitational recruitment from William & Mary kind of pulled into. It was either DC, New York, and or consulting and finance in the public sector, right? And spent about 3.5 years in consulting and really enjoyed it. I think that it exposed me to a lot of different operational and financial and risk problems. But I got really excited. I wanted to work in the public sector. I really wanted to serve in the Obama administration and really wanted to go into that world. And so I made my first position from there.
Did you see consulting as a transition? Like when you started consulting, did you have an eye towards the public sector the entire time? It sounds like you did, as you were talking about why you chose the economics degree. How did you end up doing consulting, and what was the story of you actually landing there?
It's a great question. Consulting was one of those 7 opportunities that I landed via the career and alumni network and got matched. I did a summer internship at another company called Ernst & Young, which is a Big 4 consulting company. And every job I got into, I've never really thought I'm going to switch out and only stay here for X number of years or anything like that. I really wanted to give it a shot, learn, be a sponge, and evaluate. Is this something that I am looking for? Now, I don't have a personality where I imagine maybe like a doctor or a lawyer. I'm going to do all 30 years of my professional life in that one area. I always knew that I was going to expose myself to a lot of different industries and technical domains. And so I probably went in eyes wide open, but really naive about what my next step would be. On the flip side, when I did get into consulting and I was working with public sector agents around budgets or financial models or enterprise like ERP implementations, what I often found was that the decision makers in the room were coming in as a political appointees. They were leaders or SES folks, senior executives around that. Now, in my time in consulting, I was very much so one of those millennials that has evaluated and thought about many different careers. And I was actually evaluating as my next step for consulting 3 different things. One, I had applied for a Fulbright scholarship and thought about going to Peru and doing some research there. 2, I had applied for Teaching for America, and I was placed in Brooklyn to teach middle schoolers, I think it was math. And then 3rd, I was really targeting getting into policy and doing a combination of one, going onto a campaign, and this is during 2010, if you will, so getting ready for the re-election campaign in 2012, or going directly into the public sector as a civil political servant. And frankly, I evaluated all 3 of those options.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to go into how I landed into public policy and public service, but I thought about all those different things after spending a number of years of learning the consulting game, excelling, getting promoted, growing a really large network, and then evaluating and saying, do I want to do a transition? Is there anything more I want to learn and accelerate that might be within the industry or within that domain?
Tell me a little bit more about the consulting itself. So you mentioned having public sector clients. Were all of your clients in this consulting firm public sector? Tell me more about the consultancy that you were with. What was your role? What were the kind of clients that you had and what you liked and didn't like about it?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
So I worked at a company called Grant Thornton, which is a tax audit and advisory company. Many of you might have heard of the Big Four, which is KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, and Ernst & Young. Grant Thornton is one of the second tier larger consulting companies that I joined and had a huge alumni network from my undergrad, which is how I got there. Yes, I was specifically in the public sector group, focused on state, local, and federal, as well as international clients. Grant Thornton has a large established private sector practice, but I was recruited into the public sector. So working from the Department of Homeland Security to the Department of Justice, Department of Commerce, and then working on how to think about state and local, but then also international growth, right? Working with the World Bank and the IMF around some public sector engagements as well. Now, on the technical side, the beauty of consulting is that I was able to do everything from like project management down to Six Sigma. I was able to do like financial controls and financial modeling. So I really think that having anything from a 3 to 7 month engagement allows you to get exposed to a lot of different gnarly problems to solve, a lot of different managers and people and stakeholders you have to work with. And on top of that, it allows you to just try things out. And I was within the public sector and I really enjoyed the practice of consulting. But I also knew that I was motivated to serve to a higher good, still within the public sector, but really perhaps have higher impact within policy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'd be curious to know, and you talked a little bit about having a few options next, and you touched on this a little bit, and I think I just want to get to that transition point of, it sounds like even in 2010, you had just started trying to figure out what was going to come next. Was there a point at which you thought consulting was not going to be for you long term, or did you come into this knowing, hey, I'm going to expose myself to a lot of things, and maybe there's something that is going to stand out to me as something I want to spend more time in doing, like when it came to my clients or the kind of work that you were doing with your various clients?
I was what many probably call an impatient millennial, wanting to try and see a bunch of different areas, wanting to switch around, and not necessarily seeing myself grow in the consulting game. And what I mean by that is that there are really in consulting 2 elements of success. One is client satisfaction and 2 is business development. And so I had spent so many nights and weekends rocking out some business development and helping to generate proposals in order to bring in revenue. And my clients, I love working with them and they love working with me. And I really like the client delivery part and less of the business development part. And as you grow in consulting, the expectation is The long tail is going to be less and less around the client delivery and more around sales. I didn't see that as part of my future growth and what excited me, what kind of got me out of the bed. But then also on top of that, I knew that I was good at it. So consulting is something that we can always return to, was my perspective. And at the right age of 24, 25, I thought to myself, okay, this is the right time to accelerate, try something new. Also knowing that grad school is potentially on the horizon.
That's so incredibly helpful of an insight, Rajan, that like both of those two angles about consulting, and you were good at both, but getting ahead, right? Like really advancing as a consultant meant leaning into the aspect of the business that didn't excite you as much as the other aspect, which is actually delivering awesome work product for your clients. So you have your push factors, which is okay. Advancement here means leaning into the part of things that are totally valid for what advancement takes in consulting, but what I want to do is be more focused on the problem solving and execution. So what pulled you towards what you did next with the options that you had on the table?
I think there was this light bulb moment I had, which is that I should index on risk taking. I had some options on the table, right? I had the Fulbright, I had Teach for America, and this quest to go into public service. And there are a few different ways to go about it. I wanted to index on risk, and something that I thought I was really passionate about that I could talk about for the rest of my life. With the excitement and the opportunity in Asian American Pacific Islander organizing, seeing how exciting the tech cycle was within the Obama years with Anish Chopra and open data, having a CTO and the USDS, like the digital service, I was getting really passionate and excited about that area of the world. And I started really small. When I was in consulting, I started to organize and get involved with some political action committees that was really focused on grassroots mobilization of the AAPI vote, as well as the youth. I used that to get out and go do nights and weekends and get out the vote and knock on doors, go to fundraisers and meet folks in the community and do a vast amount of networking. And that's what really kind of landed me an opportunity to volunteer and start taking leadership in South Asians for Obama. I really need to see that President Obama is reelected at that time. And so I really focused on going to as many states as possible, knocking on hundreds of doors. And I think that really allowed me to open up some doors in the Obama administration.
Awesome. That's so cool. So tell me a little bit more about how you were serving in the Obama administration. What organization were you under?
Yeah, totally. I think in general, it's really difficult to make career transitions in a different industry and in a different domain, right? So I'm thinking about like a 2x2 bell curve, right? And on the x-axis, having something like industry, right? Public sector, healthcare, tech, right? And then within the domain, areas that you might be excelling at, product management, finance, marketing, whatever they might be, right? Different tools you might work with, like Salesforce or MarTech tools, or knowing really internal tools versus student-facing or customer-facing experiences. And for me, as I was getting into the Obama administration, my goal was to stay within a similar domain, but make an industry shift. And I was able to find a Series C special appointment, political appointment into the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I was working for the CTO and CFO at the time. And just for folks to know, the Millennium Challenge Corporation is a bilateral international development agency that was started during the Bush administration, really trying to use like business and private sector approaches to international development, working with a smaller number of countries, but probably a lot more or a lot higher in terms of budget allocation, from 200 million to $1.5 billion, right? So a lot larger footprint and kind of sister agencies to USAID or OPIC. I was able to work with the CFO and CTO around everything from how to think about the budget and how to work with the Office of Management and Budget around the budgeting process, like what an A123 control might look like, right? How do we do procurement of contracts and vendors? How do we think about streamlining services for a very international and distributed workforce? And then what really riled me up and really excited me was around how to organize Millennium Challenge Corporation data, making it open and accessible, machine readable, so that practitioners in the world could use that data, right? So that could be geospatial data, monitoring and evaluation data. Look, the
Cool.
reality was that I was willing to do anything. I was truly an assistant to a senior executive. And I think that the passion, the excitement, as well as the willingness and low ego to roll up my sleeves allowed me to get exposed to a lot of different stuff.
What were some of the outcomes that you saw from the Millennium Challenge Corporation while you were there? What excited you about working there from like a mission perspective? And maybe it was more about the work and what you were able to do rather than like what those discrete outcomes were. Like all of the stuff that you're talking about, the data transparency seems really cool. And just curious, just to get a better, more tangible understanding of what the organization was doing, just trying to wrap my head around that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. So I think one of the most exciting tools that I created and worked on was using MCC data for companies to enter new markets in Africa and LATAM. So you
Cool.
can imagine we're working in Ghana, we're working in Lesotho, we're working in areas that have potential high political and economic risk. An international corporation or an NGO is looking to enter and or understand opportunities in the market. Imagine like a Unilever or a PepsiCo kind of thinking, okay, we want to go do distribution and sales there. What's the infrastructure there? Making available those data sets to practitioners, PhDs and academics, all the way down to folks in the private sector around, hey, like how can we even see where aid flows are happening within the developing world? That's some of the outcomes that I was able to work on, in addition to closing out about $1 billion+ budget, right? Year over year, and living through the 2011 government shutdown. Oh, please don't call me. No, 2013 government shutdown, excuse me. And then really being motivated around international development. That's what really excited me. And I saw that as being my ultimate career. And there were a lot of learnings in working with the civil servants over my 2 years there that then helped me transition to say, I really want to take another risk. And I worked at a really early stage startup in Nairobi, Kenya as a result of that. But that's another career transition.
No, totally. Let's talk about what led you to that. It sounds like you, with the work that you were doing, you got really excited about international development. You came in probably a little bit excited about that and like policy more broadly. And my question is like, what are the things that you liked and didn't like about the work that you were doing? Like, at what point did you say to yourself, hey, it's time to move on, or even it's time to look for the next thing that I want to do?
So in this career transition, and I had really been in policy in DC world for 5 years. And I am fast moving. I really, some might call it, have a high level of ADD, really needing to see the impact and the results of my work. Now, when we work in policy, we're talking about 5, 10, 20-year outcomes. I need to see the impact of my efforts on a daily, weekly, if not a quarterly basis. And that was really what frustrated me. We were working about 10-year out policies, and I didn't know how I was making a contribution to that ultimately, given the long-term impact of it.
So the work that you're doing, you're able to turn around very quickly, like while you're at MCC, right? And like you're able to implement stuff and deliver to your clients, to the civil servants, to like whoever those stakeholders are that you're delivering for. But then the output of that and the actual outcomes of that are going to take a long time to really develop and mature in terms of seeing what the results of that are. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, the mission statement of the MCC is to reduce global poverty through economic growth. That's a 5, 10, 20-year time horizon.
It's not something you can do in a sprint.
Right. That's far from a mid-release within a sprint, and let alone talking about quarterly waterfall projections. We're talking about a 20-year outcome. And so
Yeah.
I appreciate the value and importance of policy as it relates to global growth and reducing global poverty. I appreciate diplomacy as a part of that. But what I learned in 5 years is that I have a higher sense of urgency. And I needed to see the impact of my work, which was what excited me about getting into quicker cycles of development, quicker cycles of experimentation, and quicker cycles of learning.
So let's talk about what came next. Your push factors here: results, outcomes, KPIs, metrics. I need to be seeing the results from what I deliver sooner. What did you end on moving on to? Were there other trade-offs that you had in mind with other opportunities on the table? Tell me a little bit about the stories of what came next in this next transition.
Yeah, totally. I ended up transitioning from the Millennium Challenge Corporation and working at a super early stage startup in Nairobi, Kenya. I was doing a combination of business development and trust and safety. And it was a super early stage startup. We're talking about 5 people and less. And my decision point around this career transition was, do I want to go work in a startup in the technology space? Or do I want to further my public service and political appointee world and try to mobilize upward in that sphere? It was a gnarly, tough decision, and one that I spent hours and lots of counsel in really thinking about. And in that phase, I was a sponge. I talked to as many people as I could. I knew no one in Kenya at that time. I knew that if I were to go down the startup and technology lane, I had three criterion of what I wanted to work on. One is that I wanted it to be international. I wanted to get out of DC, which is the largest employer, at least at that time, in the world. And I really wanted to work at a smaller kind of company and really build 0 to 1 products. And the last criterion is that I really wanted to feel motivated and excited about impact of the product. And I did tons of networking. I looked at a number of opportunities. I took a gigantic pay cut and I picked up my life, put myself into a backpack and lived in and moved to Nairobi, Kenya. I did a very calculated risk assessment as well. There were a couple of ways I did that. One is that I had applied for grad school and I'd received admission to Masters of Public Policy programs up across the East Coast. And two, I had enough savings in the bank where I was able to do some gallivanting around the world. So in that time frame as well, I was able to go to the World Cup in Brazil. I was able to spend time with my grandmother who was in a nursing home and see ultimately, unfortunately, her passing and just be highly available. I was able to do a lot of with that time, and that time is often limited and so valuable. I was able to nurture that in between these transitions and really go head in first into my startup in Kenya.
You said you had a bunch of networking calls. Were there any insights from those calls, if you can remember, that kind of maybe pulled you one way or another? If you were thinking about doing something outside of the opportunity that you had in Nairobi or even grad school at the time, what were there any kind of like words of wisdom that you received at the time that made you think differently or informed ultimately what you ended up prioritizing?
That's a great question. Let me take a quick second to think about that.
Totally.
Yeah, I would say a few kind of words of wisdom came with the 60 plus people I networked, connected with, chatted with, evaluated, counseled, and got mentorship from. And it really comes down to risk, adventure, and the fact that time is a gift. And indexing on all of those in my mid 20s, not in a relationship, have a little bit of security and backup, all were elements of how I thought about a career in a startup in East Africa. Now, on the flip of that, there were some more professionalisms that are important. International experience is always valuable, and working in different environments is critical. Being able to deal with ambiguity is a skill that is highly sought after in all the different industries. But all those were just isms that were not motivating. What was motivating was that I was looking for the most adventurous, highest risk and time in order to enjoy those years that I spent overseas.
Yeah. Excellent. Cool. So tell us about the startup that you went to in Nairobi.
Yeah, totally. The startup is called M-Changa. I joined in, yeah, of course, doing a little bit of everything. And really, M-Changa is where I started my FinTech journey. M-Changa was really trying to rethink credit and access through a crowdfunding platform that offered a number of payment rails like M-Pesa, Airtel Money, in addition to cards, and then worked with PayPal for remittances as well. My experience at M-Changa is what lit the fire and excited me about product management. I was there to help drive in acquisitions and leads. I was there to develop partnerships and then really harden the platform to think about trust and safety, fraud, and some of the internal and external checks that we needed to do as the company was looking to scale and do a round of fundraising. I was working with the Gates Foundation to structure a scheme where we would use our platform to offer a some amount of money to users in refugee camps on the border of Uganda and Sudan. And essentially, with the Gates Foundation, what we were looking to do is give out these small micro loans and be able to analyze the transaction behavior. And based off of that, look at what are the reasons for fundraisers. It's a crowdfunding platform like Kiva or our Indiegogo, Kickstarter, and so on, right? And most of these are fundraisers for Kenyans by Kenyans. They're for education funds or funerals, weddings, right? Different life shocks that require this idea to changa or to really depend on the community to grow out of a hardship. And in working with the Gates Foundation, we were able to actually see like levels of social standing. We're able to see, maybe a potential leader in the community was giving more. Now, sure, they might have been higher net worth, right? But we could see based off of giving patterns, potentially signals of social credit in an area where, in a segment of the world where credit doesn't exist. There's no Experian in the emerging markets, let alone any credit history where M-Pesa and many payment methods have been leapfrogged altogether. And so in working with the Gates Foundation, enabling this partnership and really piloting in these refugee camps using a technology platform, I learned about this thing called product management. I had no idea I was doing it. I was working with developers and engineers and folks from the business, legal. I thought I was just enabling a partnership, but really what I was working on is creating a platform, a series of processes and tools and to be able to ship, learn, and use data to iterate on it. And I was truly hooked in product management afterwards.
That's amazing. Can you tell me a little bit more about what were those, maybe some of those aha moments when you were leading this partnership with the Gates Foundation? You implement this, like you're working with engineers. At what point was it like seeing the data come in? What was the kind of data that you were looking at? And one of the things that you talked about in your previous role was like, hey, it's very hard for me to see the results or the outcomes of the things that I'm actually working on. And so that's one of the reasons that you wanted to join a startup. Were you able to see that here? And how did that kind of like coalesce with your stepping into this product management role?
Yeah, one thing that I didn't mention earlier was at the age of 16, I had done an internship with a microfinance organization in India, and they were trying to use micro funds to empower women in the state of Gujarat in India, but then also India more broadly and offer overall end-to-end financial services for that population. And so that really grounded me, right? I did a lot of my research in undergrad around microfinance. And I really, like I said, thought that microfinance and development was really a pathway for reducing global poverty. What was so cool about my experience at M-Changa is that I saw that at the micro level. And I saw that at the transactional level, right? I could see transactional giving around different areas. Hey, you need a cell phone, or you want to start a business, or you have a wedding coming up, right? We were able to see all those signals at a micro level. And that was one of those aha moments for me to see this is giving behavior. This is core needs of financial access and financial services for a segment that's largely untapped. What I think I was most excited by was to be able to see some of those outcomes moving to the right. I can't say that we really saw true reduction in global poverty through economic growth in that particular POC, but it was really exciting to see some of these signals and these behaviors that are happening in a very micro-based way and very informally in a sector that is often looked away from large telcos or large banks in developing regions.
So you're doing product management for the first time. You're working with engineers. You're building a platform that you're getting people to use. You're talking directly to those actual users to get an understanding of if the platform is being used properly and if we actually provide these services to people that may not have access to financial services in a traditional sense. Ending global poverty is a many decades kind of thing, but you can see the amelioration of symptoms of poverty in what you were doing in real time. At the end of the day, what was leaving that organization like for you, and what was it informed by?
I applied to grad school in both 2013 and in 2014. And just recently, I compared my applications in 2013 to 2014. And everything that I said in 2014 that I wanted to do professionally, as it turns out, with a couple of left turns and right turns, I have largely been on that path. But in 2013, I had absolutely no idea what I was looking to do and why I wanted to use grad school and what were going to be some of the goals as a professional career around that. And in 2014, I rooted myself in this idea that I wanted to use grad school to catapult myself into product management because I learned about this world. I wanted a very multidisciplinary cross-sector education that included design and engineering, doing classes at the Harvard Business School. But in addition to that, learning about social enterprises and startups and entrepreneurship at the Harvard Kennedy School. And I was excited about opening up academic and the freedom to think and learn and become a sponge for a couple of years in grad school, up level and fine tune those skills and transition my career into product management. So I ended up staying at M-Changa until I got in and attended grad school, which I then went to the Harvard Kennedy School and spent a couple of years in very frigid and very cold Boston. and I really attribute the time that I spent in Kenya as accelerating my EQ, IQ around what do I really want professionally.
That's
And
incredible.
I can show that by looking at the applications and the clarity I had between 2013 and 2014.
It's so interesting because I've spoken to so many people who have gone to grad school because they're like, it's a thing to do, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm looking for. And it sounds like you were thoughtful about all of those decisions. And even when you applied in 2013, like you had some idea, but it was still like, it was just one of those things. Like you didn't take that bet on grad school before you really knew more about what you wanted, and then the time that you spent in Nairobi really helped clarify and ossify for you like what you were looking for, which I think is like super crucial for anybody making that decision to go back into school.
I envy people like my sister. My sister knew in high school that she wanted to be a doctor. And she's now a radiologist, a medical professional. And she had a debate in high school. Do I want to go into teaching or do I want to go into medicine? But at the ripe age of 17, you basically have charted your path from 17 until the age of 35, 36. It's structured. You know exactly what you need to do. And I would say, largely speaking, anything in medicine, anything in law, maybe even in engineering to some extent, right? There is a structured path. And there are trade-offs to that, right? It's hard to go where I am today into medicine, but then also hard to get out of medicine because there are certainly golden handcuffs in that process as well. Went into grad school wanting to spend that money on a goal that was going to allow me to get into a career I wanted. There is nothing wrong with going to grad school of, hey, I'm out of a job, I have no idea what I want to do, and an MBA is always good. Or there are certain degrees are potentially higher value than others. I certainly think that there are general degrees that can accelerate your career and some that can potentially be a barrier to growth, certainly the financial side as well. Having that clarity allows better use of the 2 to 3 years that we have in grad school and really opens up a lot of opportunities in that way as well.
So Kennedy School for Public Policy, this is like cream of the crop. And you're going to a public policy school also knowing that you want to get into product management. I haven't talked to many PMs who have an MPP. Tell me a little bit about what you were aiming for there. It sounds like you really had a very specific vision for yourself and wanting to target product management and also going to a school for public policy. That's a very unique combination. And I think like it fits a very unique vision that you had for your career going forward. And maybe that's just a statement more than a question, but tell me a little bit more about going to grad school. Tell me about the experience there and anything that particularly stood out to you during your time there that informed maybe what you wanted to do next.
Yeah, I agree that the world of technologists, let alone product managers with a policy background, is limited. And I evaluated and looked at both MBA and policy programs as well. And I probably intended to do a dual program, but got to the goals that I was looking for without that. I did a shadowing of a large hiring company that's based in the Bay Area. And I met with a product leader, like one of those winter shadow programs. He is now the CEO of that company. This is a publicly traded company. And what he told me really resonated. He said there are really like 3 flavors of product managers. The first is that you get like an X blank, right? Like X engineer, X management consultant, X lawyer. Those are minimal, right? The second is like a storyteller. right? Like I'm just really good at telling stories and weaving and communicating. And then you have a little bit of that last one, which is a Swiss Army knife, right? I've been exposed to a lot of different domains, and I wanted to use grad school to become the Swiss Army knife PM and find a niche, right? In grad school, I wrote my master's thesis on anti-money laundering and fraud detection in the payment space. One beautiful way to be able to create a product strategy for a startup, really get deep into an area of financial services that is so critical to the bottom line of the company, and also meet with a ton of folks in the industry. And a thesis allowed me to generate a network, but then also do some thought leadership within that space. I was exposed to all sorts of courses at the Kennedy School, and I absolutely loved working with my classmates. I think that grad school affords just more time, more learning, more ability to be a sponge. Certainly comes with a cost, and I certainly pay Harvard on a monthly basis my tuition bills. But it was a lovely 2 years where I was able to accelerate, get a very cross-disciplinary learning path, get some credentials, and meet some of the next generation leaders in public sector and private sector.
Incredible. So, as you were wrapping up your time there, what was coming next?
I think another question to ask is like, how did you break into product management?
Yeah,
Without an actual product management ever on my resume. And the honest answer is that a product manager gave me a shot, right? I got introduced to the chief product officer of an Intuit product called Quicken at the time. And that person provided a master's degree in product management in a 5-month period. Storian Kenderov was someone who lived in San Francisco, and we actually commuted to Menlo Park together, and he often bummed me a ride, right? And so in addition to working for the CPO and I shipped a number of really cool features. I integrated Zillow and Kelly Blue Books into Quicken. I did a market entry study for offering new personal financial management tools in the property manager and small business owner space. But honestly, my education was that every day on the 101, we drove from Menlo Park to San Francisco when he would drop me off. And I would just learn and let him talk and ask him every question under the sun. And my break into product management was by working and interning with Stoyan. And each role after that, I think I mentioned that 6 of my 7 roles were all through networking. Each of my opportunities in product have followed as a result of that, except for one. I followed the chief technology officer from Quicken to Prudential. I followed the hiring manager from Prudential to Chegg. And all of that has been network based. But my break, and the hardest break to get product management on the resume, is that first one. And that was a break from someone who just believed in me and wanted to give me a shot.
that's amazing. And so this happened while you were in grad school,
It was the summer between my first and second year.
first and second year. Gotcha. Awesome. And so you said the CTO, you followed the CTO at Quicken to Prudential. Tell us a little bit about that and how you ended up at Prudential.
Yeah, absolutely. I followed her from Intuit to Prudential as I was really looking at gigs in my second semester of school. One of the trade-offs to an atypical education is that you're not going to have the recruitment cycles that come to that school. So if you go to a Berkeley or a Stanford, a strong engineering shop, people come to your campus fairs for recruiting out for roles. I had to create those opportunities. And so I definitely used the network that I had developed from my master's thesis, from my summer internship to land myself a job. I was really excited about working in product management in a company that had operated now for 150 years. They've obviously found product market fit. They were really trying to rethink the value of the customer and create a customer-centric sales, service, and marketing platform. And what I really also loved, it was my opportunity to make it to the Bay Area. It was my birthday in mid-April, second semester in grad school. And my partner and I were looking around and it had snowed on my birthday. And we were trying to decide between moving to New York City or moving to the Bay Area. And literally that day we were like, yep, we're going to San Francisco. And we lived in San Francisco, commuting back and forth between the South Bay and the city for 7 years.
Wow. Wow. Wonderful. Tell me about your time at Prudential. What were you hired to do there, and then what did success and advancement there look like?
Yeah. I was hired to really rethink and launch a direct to consumer investment platform that helped consumers around financial security. All right. So this is an industry that's complex and jargon filled. It's an industry where there's like a nurse in Tennessee who wants support from experts around how to handle money. They're really looking for investment products and insurance products. They're looking for ways to save and optimize money around different goals. I was hired on the platforms team on the servicing side. And I was quickly promoted from a senior product manager into a director that was a people manager, expanded into owning more capabilities around sales and really taking more ownership. It is scary to me how little I knew and how many resources I was given. Right. I was a young buck product manager, had written a handful of user stories, really didn't understand first principles. I had two different squads, 10 to 15 different engineers, full stack. And I was giving up really a blank canvas in many different ways. I really leaned in onto having a strong manager at the time. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but she was such a seasoned product manager who was so detail oriented and delivered. Her mentorship was my ground floor for product management of product delivery. I created a probably 20 plus customer journeys. And really, that allowed me to get really highly detail oriented, really focus on the output and the outcomes that I was looking for. I think focusing on the why and the how in Marty Kagan terms is really important. Marty Kagan attests that product managers spend too much time on the why and not enough on the how. And what we get paid for as product managers is the how, right? We should really spend 20% on the why, do first principles and really understand the problem statement if it's big enough to matter. But that how is what we get paid for. I was able to master my craft with shipping and shipping over probably 60 plus releases, over maybe 3 to 4 different product lines, working on a number of different users, internal, external, a lot of different services, from marketing initiatives down to core platforms around how users sign up and sign in, to risk credentials around should we block the transaction. It really allowed me to execute, launch, and iterate quickly.
So curious about a couple of different things here. Was that when you came in as an individual contributor? What changed between that and being promoted to director level?
Now, when I was promoted, a separate manager previously told me this, but I think it really is true. When a person is promoted, their job must change. My job didn't change. I was still a player coach. I was still expected to deliver while also being a people manager for 2 PMs.
Gotcha.
And so there was just more workload, right? I was operating that next level. It was just more responsibility and scope that I was responsible for. I would say that the promotion that I experienced at Chegg, that was where I saw my job actually changing. But ideally, the job changes at going from an IC to a people manager responsibility.
I feel like I've had this conversation with a lot of people in product, and I do feel like I've been in environments where group product managers or director level, whatever the title is, like you end up with a small number of reports and like you still are expected to deliver or be in charge of some squads yourself or something like that. Have you seen that as something endemic to the product management function where it's like you're a highly effective person and you get rewarded for your output with a title and a raise and all that kind of stuff? But the trade-off there is a little bit of lack of clarity around the boundaries of what your role actually are.
Yeah, I think product management is a little bit like a chess game. I'll attribute this analogy to a coach of mine, Mark Rose, who offered it to me, and I'm repeating it. So all credit really goes to Mark, a very wise product person. With that said, in IC, there's a chessboard, right? And there are a set of rules and predefined rituals that are expected as a part of that chessboard. And the goal for that one chessboard is to beat the competitor, right? And to win over a number of sequences, right? But I'm fixated on that one chessboard. And when we go and get promoted to a group or director, right, then we have actually a set of 3 chessboards. And really, we're trying to optimize and focus on winning versus just those individual steps along that journey, right? And ideally, we're trying to win all 3 games because one out of those 3 games is a major loss for some of the metrics that we're really trying to move, right? And you can see this going to go and scale from director to a VP who's thinking about multiple teams and functions. Going from an IC to a people manager means we're really moving the chessboard scope and the responsibility. But this is all part of a larger game of how do we win? And we're either focused on that individual game down to all the different games that are operating on that the Grandmaster might be puppeting all along the way.
One of the things that really stood out to me about your time when you came into this job was like really getting into the customer journey, getting really into the details and understanding all of the pieces and how they fit together. How was it having to continue to do that in some cases, but then abstract to yourself a little bit and do the kind of like higher level thinking and guidance for your direct reports?
Yeah. All of my product management roles, I've started as a player coach and was a people manager. And I think that there are differences between joining a company as a people manager or joining as an IC and getting promoted and really owning that product. The reason for that is that unless you happen to be an expert in joining a company in that domain or that industry, you've never shipped on that product. You don't know the inside out. You don't know where the dead bodies are buried, right? You don't know how to unblock them, the right stakeholders, at least initially. I was able to organize a team around different sales and service capabilities and a number of features along that we wanted to be able to build, grooming a team to own different parts of that customer journey.
Totally. So tell us a little bit about what led to you moving on from Prudential.
Prudential is a 150-year-old company where you often hear this is how things have always worked. My work-life balance was great. I was able to work on impactful things and the numbers were working fine. But I was young, or I am young. I was very hungry. I wanted to evolve and grow, and I was getting static. And so that was often what motivated me with an awesome inbound. And I said, hey, this sounds like a really great opportunity to join a prop tech startup that was a unicorn at the time that was based in San Francisco, helping develop a strategy and executing on that strategy in the title and escrow side of home purchasing. And so it was really exciting to me.
So you were at a place where you were doing product management, learning a lot, you were delivering on things that were impactful, you were getting promoted, you had direct reports, you were like navigating the space of, okay, how do I be responsible for a larger portfolio of initiatives and deliver on all of them effectively? And you were successful along the way, but you're working at this financial services company that is 150 years old. And as a result of that, when you are in a function that demands moving nimbly in order to deliver quickly, those things were a little bit harder to do. Is that an accurate way to describe what was going on at Prudential at the time before you ended up moving on to
I
HomeLight?
think that people, process, and technology were parts of the push factor. Continuing in a new side of a heavily regulated industry was a pull factor. But I also go back to what are my ambitions professionally. And I definitely, going back to my grad school applications, I have an ambition to become a chief product officer of a technology company. And looking at maybe the funnel of experiences that we want within that, I think that going from large to smaller organizations allowed me to maybe be bold, expose myself to different problem areas and maturities, but ultimately the combination of the push around people, process, and technology down to the opportunity to be able to grow was a major motivation for taking the next opportunity.
Tell me a little bit about HomeLight, your time there, and like your responsibilities, and then eventually like how you ended up moving on.
Yeah, I joined HomeLight as a director of product management, responsible for the title and escrow business for being able to buy a property, right? So HomeLight was really trying to make the home buying process simple and satisfying. And it's absolutely broken. It is highly fragmented and it is a confusing process for a two-sided marketplace with both agents as well as home buyers. I was responsible for once a house is bought, how to underwrite it with insurance, and that's called title and escrow. And I was really responsible for two things: how to activate users in the title and escrow workflows, and then how to create a customer tracking and a notification platform to really digitize the title and escrow process, how to really make sure that users understood what actions they were required to do, and making that really frictionless. It was such an awesome startup that I worked for, probably about 800 people and less. And I had a killer squad that was really dedicated to title and escrow, and really enjoyed the culture, really enabled me to be bold in all the different ideas around where that particular product could go. And I joined as an individual contributor. So I joined in at really thinking about what should be the strategy and then executing on that strategy. And that was a deliberate decision I made from being a people manager to an IC, knowing that could potentially have grown. And I really enjoyed my time in a marketplace that I think is really critical. But there were a couple things that I knew that were happening. One, it was in the middle of COVID, and I had seen that real estate prices, interest rate changes, and market conditions changing. There were major layoffs happening at Zillow, Redfin, Open Door. Like, potentially there were headwinds coming to the prop tech industry. And then second, I was about to have a kid and my newborn. And lo and behold, a hiring manager that I had worked for 3+ years at Prudential called me up, said, "Hey, I have a really awesome opportunity." And it's also joining the band with another person from Prudential who was then the CTO of Chegg. And I knew nothing about ed tech, but I knew all about platforms, and I loved working for that particular hiring manager. And so I said, sign me up. And that's what made the transition from HomeLight to.
That makes a lot of sense. So you joined a startup, but you joined in 2021 and you were tracking the market. You're very intentional about the career moves that you're making. And there were probably some level of consternation that you had about the state of the industry that you were actually getting into very quickly as a part of it. It doesn't sound like you were making all sorts of moves, but let's say like you had a kid along the way. And then there's one aspect of having you did talk about, let's say like work-life balance that you had at Prudential, and you're making a pretty big change in your life. You're about to be a father. And there's probably some aspect of that you're thinking about too, like working at this like unicorn startup versus a team that kind of understands you and knows you as a person a little bit more, and not just from a working perspective, but in a place where there was a culture that you had really appreciated and probably understood could enable you to continue leading the life that you want to live as you grow and mature and become a dad and stuff like that. Is that fair to say?
Every job change guarantees that the first 18 months of that new role is going to be intense. As you ramp up, as you deliver, and then potentially go through the first calibration and then look to grow in that role. And whenever a person takes a new job, know that there's going to be an intensity period that potentially could then lead to more work-life balance, or as Amazon likes to call it, work-life harmony. I think that 18-month actually becomes higher in intensity and longer in duration in career switches.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because there's just much more to learn. There's more, we don't have that foundation as an engineer, as a product manager, as a doctor. It takes 4 years or 8 years to really become an expert. It is correct that work-life balance was not a motivation for the transition, or 2 of my 3 transitions within product management, but ultimately is something that's really important for me, especially at a really intense phase of life, which is having your first newborn.
Yeah, totally. Totally makes sense. Cool. So then you followed the team getting the band back together when you ended up joining Chegg. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if what Chegg's a two-sided marketplace that's really all focused on digital learning, right? So they have like textbooks and rentals, as well as then individuals that are looking to learn around math and writing and different learning products, and then a network of tutors and that are really helping to empower students. I joined on the platform team initially, responsible for payments and payment processing, as well as then identity and access. Quickly got promoted and took on a leadership role as a people manager to be able to grow a function of being able to own the movement of money. And so that included really the full life cycle within the revenue organization, how to really drive acquisitions and optimize involuntary churn, everything from the top of the funnel where a user signs up and signs in, all the way down to where we're able to bill them and have they retained as a happy and satisfied customer. You know, what I learned and loved about Chegg under this constant quest to learn more around data informed decision is that Chegg was constantly rapidly experimenting. And there are often concurrent A/B tests that I was responsible for that were at scale and that were creative and that were really driving the bottom line. And so this was the penultimate experience where I was not only able to have the data uh, structure to be able to analyze data and to really be able to use qualitative data and understanding and empathizing with users, but now at scale, being able to run tons and tons of A/B tests to see how can we really move the needle in terms of the bottom line. That's what I really enjoyed about my tenure.
That's really awesome. And a similar question to when you ended up as a manager at Prudential for the first time. Did you have more management responsibilities or like more direct reports during your time at Chegg? Obviously, that Chegg is where we met, and I dotted line reported into you. So I'm sure you had a bunch of dotted lines as well. How did your responsibilities change over time, over the course of your time at Chegg? What was it like being a manager? What are the things that what were the things that you learned during that time being like a product leader?
Yeah, sure. I joined as a people manager of one and really grew to manage and work with a team of 4 PMs and a couple dotted lines, including working really closely with you. And when I got promoted, because we were really looking to evolve the team from a feature factory into a true product team and really ground ourselves in first principles, really ground ourselves on delivery with quality, and really focus on owning the end to end experience. I was gifted amazing managers at Chegg. I think in 3 years, I had 4 managers and was involved in 5 different org changes. And often I think that with org changes, as long as we're bought into the vision and we're also know or have some confidence in the security of our role, org changes are almost always for the better. And so keeping my head down, focused on the work, really being able to use my managers as learning and growing. And then being a people manager for all individual contributors, both senior and junior, hiring them, growing them, getting them promoted, motivating them, focused on really unblocking them, or just shoot the shit.
So you talked about reorgs. I've experienced some of those reorgs with you. Reorgs in particular are something that I think can be like I do appreciate the really a good faith positive interpretation for those reorgs. Having worked at a bunch of startups and companies and seen reorgs in all sorts of places, I know that it causes a lot of consternation, and I'd be curious to know how you dealt with that as a manager, fundamentally allowing them to have some sense of belonging and trust in a changing environment with changing dynamics.
Yeah, I think that uncertainty is difficult to traverse. I think I use a few things to ground both me and my team. First is show a high degree of empathy. Second, motivate around that person. And last, articulate and gate around the controllables and the uncontrollables. Being able to gate and motivate that individual on your team around what's happening up top and how that affects what you're working on. Everyone is motivated by the bullets on your resume, right? So there's also always life after that particular organization. Not to say that you're trying to leave that organization, but there's always life afterwards. And so what are those truest, proudest accomplishments that you're going to put on your resume? My job as a people manager is to set that person up for success with at least one opportunity that's going to be the bullet point on their resume. So motivate around the work, knowing that up top, it's a little insecure and there might be risks associated to that as well. And just last but not least, controllables and uncontrollables. It's uncontrollable. There's nothing for you to be able to do. Acknowledge it, know it's present, and have that empathy around it, but it's just focus on what you can control.
There are a couple of things to this point in your career that I wanted to think about and maybe just close the loop on them. So, one of the things early on that we talked about was like your risk appetite and your sense of adventure for wanting to try new things, like when you went to Nairobi working at a smaller company. At this point, when you got to Chegg, did that risk appetite change? Your motivations for your transitions have been very, very interesting, made a lot of sense of what you wanted to focus on, what you wanted the work to be about, how you wanted the work to be informed, i.e., data, scale, etc., people management. So I'd be curious to know how that sense of like risk taking changed over time, or did it not? Did you find a sense of risk coming into Chegg, let's say? So that's the first thing that I'd want to talk about as one of those through lines.
I think that my 20s and early 30s allowed me to take significant risk to try multiple pieces of the chess puzzle. Career switches, or the motivation for career switches, is limited if you found a passion for what you do. I love the intensity, the fact that every day is different. It's a soulless job, meaning that you have to say no more often than yes. And it is one that is being challenged by technologies outside left and right.
Some of the risk is built into the function.
There's an inherent risk in the industry, and that might have changed also. Microsoft used to call product managers project managers, or there are different names for it, but potentially, if we look at a career along a time horizon, we see that risk is being able to find ultimately what that passion is. And passion might be something that you're good at, that also that you can monetize and get paid for. I was really good at consulting, but I probably wasn't going to be able to monetize business development. And so I tried that out and I took risks to try another area. I think the younger we are, the higher risk we could take. Now, on the flip side, the average age for a student getting a master's degree at the Harvard Kennedy School is 40 plus. Those are, in my mind, are the true champions because they have done an entire career, probably 20 plus years. They probably landed on something they're passionate about, that's monetizable. And even then, they've decided to take on another risk in transition. I don't think there's a glass ceiling to when risk should be curtailed. But in this point of my professional journey, where I am in the career I've chosen, I really like what I do. And risk requires maybe a little bit of a refinement around industry and domain. In career transitions, making a change in both industry and function is very hard. But making a change within an industry into a different function, or within the function, different industries, potentially will allow the flexibility in that transition. But two different changes within industry and function, it's not impossible, but it's much more stacked against you.
And it's more likely you'll be doing something a lot more lateral than like advancing along the way.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. Like growth might not be guaranteed in that, both in terms of scope, responsibility, numbers, and all that. And that's where risk comes in, right? In transition, if I want to make a jump, can I do that? I made the jump from public sector to a startup and took over a 50% pay cut because I knew that I wanted to catapult and take that risk to get into technology, the industry. I discovered the function of product management. And now my risk appetite to leave product management is very low, but the risk appetite for another industry that's not ed tech is incredibly high.
Yeah, totally makes sense. The other question I want to ask you about being up until this point in your career as a director of product at Chegg, there was multiple times that you talked about very quickly getting promoted into a manager role. What would you say to someone who is trying to get promoted either into a management role or advance one way or another? What were the things that you did that allowed you to get promoted so quickly in multiple roles?
I have never asked for a promotion or negotiated one. It's always been given to me. And I think that it is incredibly hard, both as an individual contributor going to people management or even more so in product management in comparison to consulting. In consulting, there's a rubric, right? But on the flip of that, I go back to that 18-month bell curve. Those first 12 to 18 months is where we press the gas pedal. And not to say we by any means go into coast and then the neutral after that, but I think that's the time frame to hit the ground running, deliver with high impact, and rewards comes as a result of that.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. It's like make your mark early on is what I'm hearing, and take that first year plus like very seriously. And for you, the results have spoken for themselves, and like you've built trust very quickly and gotten promoted as a result without even asking for it, which I think is really awesome. Cool. Let's wrap up with your time at Chegg, and let's talk about what you have on the docket now.
Yeah, totally. So post Chegg, post having a newborn, I've been able to, and fortunate enough to be doing some fractional product management consulting work with early stage startups and like the insurtech and the hiring AI space. I was at Chegg for about 3 years and really was at a point where I was able to execute with my eyes closed. And I was also impacted by a reduction in force. Gen AI is indeed disrupting business models left and right. And the stock price of that company went from 120 share down to about 50, right? Now, for me specifically, like my entire team was outsourced to India. And in addition to that, like I was there at Chegg in the glory years of a lot of build, and with cost cutting and efficiencies in place, there was a lot more of a buy and a vendor-based commerce mindset at the company. And so in a very Netflix way, like I bought myself out of a job. And as a result of that, I'm now looking for opportunities in product management, either as an individual contributor or as a people manager. But in the meantime, I'm also doing some fractional product management consulting work. I am really enjoying this space in my life where I'm honing in my craft, working on a lot of different marketplaces and a lot of different problem areas, really focusing on that first principles. And in the meantime, making and changing a lot of diapers.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Rajan. I think our listeners are going to learn a lot from this conversation. I learned a lot from this conversation and really appreciate your time.
I appreciate you having me on. Good luck on the journey to scale out Push-Pull podcast, and really excited to be here with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. We got to cover how he thinks about career transitions and the frameworks that he would apply to his trajectory over time. The other thing that was really impressive, and this is something that I noticed from working with him as well, was how quickly he wants to get his hands dirty, really understand the customer journeys, the entire ecosystem and landscape of every company that he's working with and for. What was really interesting is how his involvement in the complexity in order to deliver something changed or didn't change when he became a manager. To be an effective manager for individual contributors who are really in the game trying to move the ball forward for their scope of work, while still making sure that he can lead them to success and also be working on his own surface areas that require him to be more in the weeds. So the combination of having to delegate and abstract yourself and provide coaching and mentorship while also being in the weeds in other areas is an interesting challenge that I got to pick his brain about. A lot of this resonated with me because I do feel that it's very relevant to product management specifically, but I think it applies more broadly as well. I think anyone in any type of job function where you get promoted to a manager or a lead, where you have more surface area, more projects that you're responsible for, there's always going to be a challenge of understanding how in the weeds you need to be. It's definitely given me a lot to think about. I hope it's given you a lot to think about. And so, yeah, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe and follow, give us a review on your favorite podcast platform, like or subscribe if you're watching this on video on YouTube. If you have any questions and you're in my DMs, please do reach out. And you can also send me an email at Varun, that's VARUN, at pushpullpodcast.com. So thank you very much.